In this video, I'm going to provide a brief introduction to PrimeFaces Dialogs. So in our system, we've created a list of cars. So we created a Maven web application. We defined a data table in the index.x HTML file, and we created 3 source files. We created a car object or a car class to represent car objects, and their attributes are ID, brand, color, year, price, and solid state. And of course we have a default constructor, a constructor that takes all those attributes and sets them, and then getters and setter methods for each of the attributes. We've created a car service, and this car service has a method, create cars, which will generate a given number of car objects and puts them in a list array. And when cars are being instantiated, we've created some methods to just kind of randomly assign the attributes for the cars. And then we created our manage bean. And this manage bean has a post construct annotated method that as soon as this simple JSF object is instantiated, the platform will automatically call this init method and create our car list, which is here. And then we have an attribute to get our list of cars and set our list of cars. So the next thing I want to do is I want to add functionality for the user to be able to add a car to the list. So what I'm going to do is in our index.x HTML page, I'm going to create a PrimeFaces command button. And when this command button is clicked, it will display to the user a dialog box that will allow the user to enter attributes for a car, save it, and then that car will be put in our car list. So this command button, we're giving it an ID. We can optionally assign an icon to it. The value is the label that you want on your button. The action listener, what method do you want to call in your managed bean when this button is clicked? And the method I'm going to call is prepare create. And all this is going to do is instantiate a brand new car and have it ready for a user to set its attributes. Then after this method has been executed, we're asking our platform to update a car create form, which we don't have yet. And that's going to be the form that's going to hold the attribute data. And we're going to ask them to display or pop up a dialog box. And we're going to call it car create dialog. So first, let's go to our manage bean and see that I added the prepare create method. So when the user says, I want to create a new car, clicks the create button, this method will be executed. I've created an attribute called current car, and I've instantiated a new current car. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new XHTML page that's going to have our dialog. So we're going to right click on our project and we're going to say new, other, we're going to select web, and we're going to select XHTML. and we're going to call this create. So now we have our new create method. And this is the XHTML page that's going to hold our PrimeFaces dialog. First thing we need to do is to make sure that we add the PrimeFaces and JFS namespaces to our XHTML file. I'm going to encase our dialog box into composition tags, and we can talk more about these later, but basically what these allow the user to do is to just encapsulate their PrimeFaces tags in well-deformed HTML. So to begin the creation of our dialog, we create a P:PrimeFaces dialog. We give it an ID, anything we want. We give it our widget name, and that widget name is going to match the widget name that we use here. So this is the name of our dialog. So we put the name of our dialog. Modal true just means that we can't leave this screen without closing it. Whether or not we want it to be resizable, we're going to append it to the body of our site, and this is the header that we want on our dialog. And of course we close it with dialog top tags. The next thing we need to do in our dialog is we need to encase our input text in a form so that we're able to submit this to our managed bean. Now the ID of our form needs to match the form name that we gave here in our command button on our index X HTML page. And before I start defining the input text, and we're going to have input text for each attribute of the card to allow the user to enter the card attributes. But before I start defining those, the one more thing I want to do is I want to create a grid panel. And we're going to specify that we want 2 columns. And this should just make our layout nicer. Now I'm ready to define what data I want to be able to have the user enter in through this dialog box. we're not going to allow the user to enter the ID. We're going to use auto increment, and we're going to create the ID ourselves. But we're going to allow the user to enter the brand. What we want to do is associate the data that's being entered through this dialog box to the current car that we have defined in our managed bean. That means what we need to make sure is that we have getters and setters for this current car. So then we can say so when we ask for the brand, when the user enters the brand, it's going to be stored in the brand attribute of the current car that we've defined in our managed bean. So now let's go ahead and define the other attributes for this car. So we've defined the brand, the year, the color, the price, and the solid state. So the next important step is to make sure that we include this create.xhtml file within our index.html file. And we can see that the UI include is an undeclared component. So we have to go up and make sure that that namespace is defined. So we've added the JSF facelet. Okay, so let's run our application and see what we have. So now we see that we have our list and we've created a create button. We click on the create button and it pops up our dialog, and we have it in a grid so that we have brand, year, color, price, solid state, and the user will be able to enter in the values. Okay, so we have a number of things that we still need to add to this. The first one being that once they've entered the data, we want them to be able to save it. So we have to create another command button. It's going to be label save. what method in our manage bean do we want to call in order to save this method, or in order to save this car. And we can just we'll write a save method to save this to the database or to our list array of cars. So after it's been saved, we want to update our list. So we're going to go back to our index and we're going to give the form an ID. We're going to call it car list. And then after we've saved a car to our list of cars, we're going to update car list. And I've got to, it's case sensitive, so I've got to make sure that I have it exactly the way I've put the label there. So we want to update this car list. So the important thing to remember is when I click the Save button, the data entered, because I have it in a form, the data entered in these input text files is stored in the current car attributes. So that when I click the Save button and I go to this simple JSF, my Manage Bean Save method, the current car has these values stored in it. So let's go to our Managed Bean, and we know that we want to create a new method called Save. We have Prepare Create. Now we're going to create a method. And what we're going to be saving is the car that's in the current car. So basically what we want to do is put that in our list of cars. So we could say cars dot add current car, and that'll put the current car in our cars list. We're going to make sure that it calls our method in our Manage Bean, and we call to specify that we're communicating with our Manage Bean. We use #, open curly bracket, close curly bracket. And then the next step, I want to, after I click Save and after the car has been added to the list, I want to hide my dialog. So I want the dialog box to go away. So I'm going to add the hide method of the dialog. So let's run this and see if it works. All right, so here we have our create. So we can add the brand, BMW. The year is 2015. The color is blue. Price is $30,000. And the solid state is true. And we save that. The dialog goes away. Now we see a problem here though. Notice that the ID was 0. So we have to come up with a way that we can auto increment this ID. So let's see if we can figure out how to do that. We're going to go back to our code, and it's our service. Car service is the one that creates our car, and it's the one that keeps track of the IDs. So instead of putting the current car here, what we're going to do is we're going to pass in to our service we're going to add a method to our service and have our service add the car rather than adding the car directly in our controller or in our managed bean. So in our service, we're going to set the ID, and notice we have the unique ID here. And every time we added a car, we incremented that ID. So we're going to use the net unique ID for our car. Then we're going to increment it so it's ready for the next car. And then so the next thing I need to do is, instead of declaring our list of cars here in the create cars, I'm going to make it an attribute of our class. So we initially create it here, then we can have other functionality where we can add and delete from it. So now I can add a new car to it. In the car service, I've added a static list of cars. We have a method for randomly creating whatever number of cars in our list. So in our application, we pass in 10. So initially, we're going to randomly create 10 cars in our list. But then, if we want to add a new car to this static list of cars, then here I can set an ID and add the car to the list, and then I need a method to get the cars. So now in our simple, we have add cars, and then we want to get the new list of cars. All right, let's run it and see if that fixed our ID problem. Create a car, brand, okay, now we're getting our unique IDs. One other thing you'll notice is we have brand and we have color as just text boxes. But in our service, we have a predefined set of brands and colors. So what we really would like to do, instead of having the user use a text box and enter their own color and their own brand, we want them to select from a drop-down list. So that's the next thing that we want to add to our dialog box, is we want to change brand and we want to change color to drop-down select boxes rather than input text. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to make sure that our managed bean has a list of brands and a list of colors. So in our service, notice that we have two methods that'll return a string list of brands and a string list of colors. So we can ask our service for those lists. So in our managed beans, we can define those two lists. And when we initialize our managed bean, we can say to get those lists from our service. Now we have our list of colors and our list of brands in our managed beans. We want to make sure we have getters for both of those lists. We don't need setters because we're not going to be adding to them. We're just going to be reading them. So we're going to convert our brand from an input text to a select box. So our drop-down box, we use a select one menu. And the value for this is our current car brand. The next thing we're going to do is specify what is the list of our drop-down values. So we want a list for them to be able to select from. So our select items is So this calls the get brands from our manage bean. So this is get brands, and so we get the list of brands here, and then whichever one the user selects, it's going to be stored in the brand. So let's see if that worked. Now we have a drop-down list that we can select from rather than enter our own. So we want to do the same thing with color. So this is color, and this is our list of colors. It says that our car create brand has already been used, so obviously I need to change my ID because that's supposed to be unique. So we're going to select Renault. The year is going to be 2015. The color orange, 20,000. And we have a new car in our list. Okay, the one last thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of data validation. So what we want to do first is we're going to add something called Growl. And this is simply a place where we're able to display error messages. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a validation to year. And what we want to do is to specify that year cannot be